Yeah, to introduce myself, I'm Rose from the Communist Party of Ireland, from the Women's Committee. And I'm really happy to have you here for this talk on the International Working Women's Day. For any of our members who may not be familiar with you and your channel, could you perhaps introduce yourself?
Hi everybody, I'm Luna. I'm from a Vietnamese communist born and living in Vietnam. Now I'm currently visiting the US, but I'm gonna be back very soon. I have a YouTube channel called Luna ơi on YouTube, and I mostly talk about, what's going on in Vietnam. I mean, our path to socialism, and also I talk a lot about Vietnamese women and our roles in our history and the modern society to this day. And it's my honor to be here today and have a chance to talk to you about Vietnam and especially Vietnamese women. Yeah, very much glad
Yeah.
to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you. We're all really thrilled to have you, and the honor is ours. We would like to start by mentioning a bit of the role of revolutionary women in Ireland, and the various groups in the struggle of independence. So a few notorious groups that were active in Ireland before and during the Rising were in Éireann, that
Mhm.
translates as the Daughters of Ireland. They were a group who mainly campaigned um, to go against the recruitment of Irish people into the British Army to fight their imperialist wars overseas, and for the preservation of Irish culture and language. Another group was the Cumann, which translates as the Women's Council, and they were active in the Rising of 1916, where the Irish people rebelled against the British rule.
Mhm.
And they helped out by supplying intelligence, by procuring arms, and also in armed combat during the Rising itself. Could you perhaps tell us something about the role of revolutionary women during the Vietnamese struggle?
Yeah, I mean, the history of women in Vietnam is very interesting. And I think that I would love to, go back to our history of thousands of years ago because like that affect our society today a lot. So we've been through a lot of struggles, Vietnamese women. And 2000 years ago, at least according to our official record, 2000 years ago, our society was matriarchy, means that women held power of the whole society. It was very important. And that we still have that heritage to this day, but sadly, about 1,000 years ago, we were conquered and occupied by Han emperors, for 1,000 years from the north. So, and they brought patriarchy into our society, and it caused a huge conflict in our, daily life because a woman held power before and now they're forcing the man, this extreme sexism coming from the Han emperors and also from patriarchy and Confucianism. And that is very, very tough. And we were oppressed for another 1 to 2,000 of years because of that. Even when after we gained independence from Han emperors, Vietnamese society became feudal with kings and lords and nobles at that time, but we still follow Confucianism and patriarchy and sexism. So it was really, really tough. And then in the 19th century, the colonialist French came and they conquer us for another hundreds of years. And on top of the already existing sexism, patriarchy, and Confucianism, they brought in racism. And also, of course, the Western style of sexism too. It was like worse for Vietnamese women. At that time, Vietnamese women were forced to be prostitute for French colonialists, and it was very traumatizing chapter of history for Vietnamese women. We had no saying in the society whatsoever, but then it were oppressed more and forced to be sex workers for French. It was really tough. And then after we defeated French colonialism, we ousted the king and we had a democratic Vietnam. The US came and brought imperialism to our country in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And despite all the lies that the US said that, you know, Saigon and South Vietnam was like the pearl of Indochina with great economy or something, but in fact, Vietnamese women was once again forced to be prostitutes for the US troops. Let alone countless numbers of mass rapes happened during the Vietnam War that millions of Vietnamese women were victims of that. And another fact is that the prostitution age of Vietnamese women in Vietnam at that time during the US occupation was from 6 years old. It was how horrible it was for Vietnamese women. And Saigon, the city of South Vietnam at that time, the capital city of South Vietnam, was the biggest brothel of Indochina during the 60s and the 70s. That was a very brutal history that Vietnamese women had to go through. So with that history in us and with the heritage of being a matriarchal society, Vietnamese women joined the revolution from very, very early age. And in fact, one of the first founders of the Communist Party of Vietnam in the 1930s was a woman, and she was really a great fighter. The Communist Party of Vietnam formed in 1930, and right from the same year, Vietnamese Women's Union also formed. So that's like, you know, like the history of Women's Union in Vietnam and the history of the Communist Party of Vietnam is intertwined like that, and we were so very, very, very powerful. And yes, so we also had, you know, one of our greatest general during the fight against the US was also a woman. Her name was Nguyễn Thị Định, and she was in the 60s and in the late 50s and the 60s, she was a leader of a whole army called the Long Hair Army, and she led like millions of women in the South rose up, and she led a whole movement called the Uprising Movement in 1969 to 1960 that like 9 million Vietnamese people joined her movement and joined the Long Hair Army and won against many battles with the US puppet government and the US troops too. Also, another very famous woman of Vietnam is, you know, the famous picture, the victory smile. And that is, yeah, that is one of our, I think like one of our chairman of the Women's Union of Vietnam, and she then became the Minister of Tourism of Vietnam too. And she was captured by the US puppet government. She was imprisoned by them, and the sentence was 20 years. But in the court in late 1960s, she said, yes, I mean, you sentenced me 20 years of hard labor, but will your government last long enough to do that? And this is a fact. Yeah, and 4 or 5 years later, the government was ousted and she was out of prison. And yeah, so I mean, Vietnamese women and the revolution always work together, and women is one of the main force of the revolution of the Communist Party of Vietnam. And during the war, during the fight, the resistance wars against France and then the USA, women, we work hard a lot, both on the rear, you know, we grow food, we raise children, and we prepare food, and we send weapons to the front line. We also fought in the front line alongside. We are soldiers too, so I am very proud of the history of women in Vietnam.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. It's a little similar here in Ireland with the proclamation of Irish independence. It was written that there will be no difference between sex, and that made a lot of women help in the rising and in the war against British imperialism. So a lot of Irish women, they fought for Irish independence to reach the equal rights, to be free of sexism. We had indeed one famous Irish woman. She was called Constance Markovich. She was in the Commandement, so in the Women's Council, and she helped us smuggle in arms from abroad, from Germany, for example, to supply the the Irish Rising. She was one of the leaders of 1916, and although the rising failed and the leaders were captured and they got the death sentence, they actually let her live, because their assumption was that she was just a woman. She was just convinced by men to join. So even in the revolution, the British colonists, they didn't really regard women as equal as men. So although a lot of women really fought hard to gain equal rights to Irish independence, there was also a counter-revolution in Ireland that resulted in a civil war and in a treaty with England. And in this counter-revolution, a lot of women's rights were eroded. So this had a terrible effect on the women all over Ireland, and everything they had fought for, that was taken away again. I'm sure you're familiar with some examples. In 1923, just after the Irish independence, extramarital sex was outlawed, and offenders were sent to mother and baby homes of the Magdalene laundries. So they were separated from their own children. And of course, there was no such punishment for the men. And all in all, the rights, they declined, and further declined, until women were not even allowed to have a job when married. Could you tell us perhaps a little bit more about what a successful revolution in Vietnam has meant for women's rights over there? And how did the role of women in Vietnam evolve post-independence?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, well, what to say? I mean, here's the thing. The revolution was the only choice for Vietnamese women, because only communism and the revolution will bring us true freedom and our true rights. Because Vietnamese women went through feudalism, went through patriarchy society, you went through colonialism and imperialism, and none of the things that I mentioned before ever happened. What they did was to oppress us even more and to dismiss our voices and dismiss our role in society. And we were even victimized, and we were mistreated terribly by those people. And the revolution was like the sunlight that can bring us our true freedom society. So that was why from the start we joined the revolution, as I said earlier. And it meant, the revolution meant everything for Vietnamese women. It brought us, a chance to raise up our voice, a chance to fight for our own rights and freedom. We do not have to wait for a man to do that for us. We are tired of waiting for that for 1,000 of years. We're tired of it, and the revolution was the only chance for women to really stand up and do that, fight for our own freedom, our own rights. So, and that was when our first democratic election happened in 1946, just 1 year after Vietnam gained independence from fascism and colonialism. And right from that very first election, Vietnamese women had right to vote. Like, nobody even argue about it. No question asked. Women, of course, can vote right from the first election like that. So since that, like, the history of the Communist Party of Vietnam is a history of women's rights, and we always fight hard to join the revolution and to start a country. And actually, I mean, the first chairman of the Women's Union of Vietnam is also the first female representative in our first National Congress in 1946. So yeah, from day one like that, we had a very powerful stance like that. And yeah, I'm very proud. And had been through, the war against the French and the war against the US troops. And now we have our rights. And how do women's rights in Vietnam evolve? Wow, it was a massive change for Vietnamese right during the time, because as you know, under Confucianism, Confucianism is an ideology kinda came from a Han guy. His name was Confucius. Yes, and I gotta say that he had a very extreme ideology about women and against women. Women at that time could not have any saying in the society and in the family whatsoever. Women were not allowed to go to school. Women were not allowed to do business. Women were not allowed to design anything in the family. No. The only thing, the only job that women must do and can only do is to be a mother and to be a wife. And that's it. And a man can have as many wives and concubines as he wants, but if a woman, even if their husband died and they decide to move on, that's a death sentence for them. We can't do that. So like we were Vietnamese women was the access of man at that time. And then yes, colonialism came, and it was whether we had to deal with that old society, and then we had to deal with new racism coming from French colonialists. And then prostitution was enforced in Vietnam, and it was horrible. Fascism. Vietnam was under the occupation of fascist Japan for 5 years from 1940 to 1945. It led to 2 million Vietnamese died of starvation. Yes, and it was, the crimes committed by the Japanese fascists. It was speechless. I could talk about that because it's too painful. Yes, it's too painful to talk about. And then after that, the US troops. It's just atrocities after atrocities after atrocity. But nowadays, thanks to generations of Vietnamese who fought in the revolution, who joined the Communist Party and become communists, and all other Vietnamese people who joined the fight too, we won our war against the USA, and we truly gained our independence. And since then, the Vietnamese women's rights drastically improved from 1970s until now. For example, there are many examples out there, but I can give you some example because I can tell that, first of all, the abortion discourse is being discussed a lot in the West. And to be honest, me look at it from a Vietnamese perspective is very strange to me, because in Vietnam, abortion has never been illegal. Nobody even argue about that abortion in that. Like, it's obvious a right for women. Nobody can tell us what to do. And like it's not even a discourse in Vietnam about should abortion be illegal or legal. It's like, what? Excuse me, that's obvious, right? It's our rights, right? So yeah. And also Vietnamese women being protected very strongly by the laws and by the government of Vietnam. The Women's Union of Vietnam is so powerful and is so strong that we have a saying that you do not mess with Vietnamese Women's Union. So really powerful, strong. But at the same time, we also are facing some problems too. It's not perfect yet. Because and most of the problems that Vietnamese women are dealing with today coming from they are social problems, not because of the law or the government. The social problems means that the Confucianism 2,000 years ago, patriarchy, there's still remnants of that kind of ideology in Vietnam, in Vietnamese society to this day, and we are fighting against that hard. For example, in my parents' time, like getting divorced is something like a sin. It's really hard, and they can't not divorce, because like that would be a shame to the family, a shame to the village, because like, oh, you divorce, that's bad, it must be you must did something wrong, because it must be always the woman's fault, never the man's fault. That is very annoying. I do not like that. But for my generation, born in the late 80s and then the 90s and early 2000s, we are getting stronger and stronger and powerful. So it's a fact that the divorce rate in Vietnam is getting higher and higher every year, you know, and old people, they whine about it. They're like, oh, this is so bad. Look at what's happened. What's wrong with young people? Why they do not want to be married anymore? And I told them like, actually, it's a good sign. You know what? Because women now, we are more and more brave to walk out of a toxic relationship and a toxic marriage. And you should be happy for that. We are not like you anymore. We are not be bear, you know, domestic violence for that anymore. No, domestic violence is also a problem in Vietnam. That is why we have a strong laws and protection for women. The Women's Union of Vietnam, we have, you know, a secret house to protect the mother and the child. And anybody who need help can report that to their local women union. Every single, you know, like village of Vietnam would have a woman union. My mom is a member of a woman union in her village. I am also a woman member of a woman union. It's like every woman in Vietnam over 18 years old are automatically a part of the women's unions like that. And great protection. And my cousin was protected by the women's union, and she has a very toxic husband. And when my cousin had a baby, she tried to divorce him because he was so violent, you know. But then their family like stole the child, 2 months old, stole the child and tried to take the child away from her. And we seek the help from the women union in her village and in her husband's village too. And it was so powerful that her father-in-law was so scared that he had to like, you know, like help my cousin, because like the woman's union literally like go and pressure him in his office, like, you need to talk to your son and give back the child and get a divorce, agree for them to get a divorce, but like you cannot do that. So it's like scare the family so much that they agree to divorce her. And my cousin has a happy life right now with her little girl. And so yeah, so aside that is very strong and powerful. That's why I said we Vietnamese are saying that you do not mess with Vietnamese women union. No. So yeah. So yeah, we still have problems, the remnants of the old society. We still deal with racism. Yes, and of course, sexism coming from the West, where, you know, like we usually got paid less in the workplace, even though we do the exact same job. And also, we were forced to be pretty, to wear dress nice and wear makeup all the time. We go, it's tough, yes. But we are fighting for that too, Vietnamese women now say. And I strongly believe that we will win that fight very soon. And yeah, and just look at all the progress women all over the world making and progress in Vietnam too. I strongly believe that we will win. And another thing is that like Vietnamese women, we also have very good maternity leave, means that up to 180 days. And no company can fire pregnant women. Nope. They are not allowed to fire pregnant women, and they have to make sure that we will have our maternity leave and maternity allowance and full like salary during that time. So yeah, pretty good protection. And also the fun fact too, the workers union in Vietnam. So around 90% of working places in Vietnam are unionized, only 10% are not. And we will move toward 100% unionized very soon in the future. But anyway, and in every single unionized working place, if there are more than 3 women, we can have a women council within the workers union to protect just women's rights. This is pretty great, I gotta say. So yeah, I mean, we have bright future, and we have, you know, the Communist Party on our back, and the government also protecting us. And the fun is that we fight the social problems in the society.
Yeah, thank you very much for your insights on the position and the improvements on the women's rights in Vietnam. It's really great to hear what can be achieved for women under communism. Here in Ireland, we're still dealing with the horrible legacy of the Catholic Church and their anti-women laws that have been let loose on Ireland since the 1920s. So we're still clawing our way back up from there. Here in 2018, we had a referendum on legalizing abortion because it was a part of the Irish constitution that abortion was illegal. So at this point, many people argue that the women of Ireland, that they have fought for abortion and they won. But the difference here is that even though we have achieved the right here, the healthcare is still not in a place that we can actually get easy access to abortion. So many women, they are still forced to go to England for medical care. And the same goes with divorce, even though it is now legal again in Ireland to divorce your partner. With the current housing crisis, there's no real way for women to go. So even though women want to divorce an abusive husband, they don't have anywhere to go. They can't find a place of their own. So even though the rights on paper, they may seem good, in practice, it's still really restrictive here in Ireland. What you mentioned about one of your leaders who was held captive in the capitalist capital in Vietnam, it's a bit reminiscent of Constance Markovits, who I mentioned before. She was a socialist active in the Rising, and she escaped death penalty because she was a woman.
Yeah.
She was later elected as the first woman in British Parliament, but she refused to go.
Oh.
Because Ireland was not independent.
Yes.
So this is one part of the legacy that's the UK, that the British still have to deal with, that the first woman in Parliament, she refused to show up.
Yeah. I mean, that's I respect her for that, because
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, I mean, what's been going on in Irish, and, the British Empire still occupies the Northern Ireland to this day is ridiculous. And also at the same time, look at the USA still occupying South Korea and Philippines and Puerto Rico and Guam and Hawaii. The list goes on and on and on. So like, this is the face of imperialism, we have to fight against this, because here's the thing. I truly believe that capitalism is not the answer of a woman's right. Just look at what's been going on with women's rights in capitalist countries, especially in the West. It's how hard it is for women to get abortion, how hard it is for women to get a divorce. It is ridiculous, because it is outright, and we must have an equal right, and that is so ridiculous that they just happen like that in the West. And I truly believe that based on our own history, Vietnamese women's rights massively improved only after we had a successful revolution. We won against imperialism, capitalism, colonialism, and fascism that we can have to this day. We have a foundation to fight. It doesn't mean that we are perfect. I have to say this many times, because a lot of people just think that Vietnam is a utopia. Like, it's not a utopia. It still has many problems. It's just a little bit better than in the rest of the world. And it just means that we are better just because we had the revolution and we follow the socialist path. And our final goal is to have a communism, and it is the Communist Party that really, really always on the back of Vietnamese women. And yeah, that is like, just trust me, because we went through all of that. Communism is the answer.
Yeah, I fully agree with you there. Here in the capitalism, it's only pretense of rights, but in the end, nothing really changes. And right now, Ireland is in this strange position. The cost of living here is increasing with rents that are near impossible to pay.
Wow.
Childcare and energy, it's also getting more increasingly more expensive. And at the same time, Ireland is tying itself to US imperialism, for example, by lending its airfields here in Shannon to conduct operations from. And US imperialism itself, it's in crisis. Do you have a message for revolutionary women here in Ireland?
Yes, I do have a message for Ireland women. I would say this very straight. If you are a feminist, you must be a communist because communism is the only way. Joining the revolution is the only path for you if you feminists ever want to have rights and freedom. True rights and freedom for women, not just the lies coming from capitalism and liberalism. Because what capitalism does is to use sexism and racism to separate the working class. You know, they use that. They want it because they can pay women less. And then let's look at women's rights in the USA, you know, literally the imperial core now. Women's over there, they do not even have a maternity leave. They don't. Like, how on earth that women in the richest, the wealthiest country on earth do not have the right to leave with full paying when they are pregnant? And then now they are banning abortion. Look at what capitalism been doing to our right. It's just we're going backwards. I gotta say that. And liberalism is also not an answer, even though they always claim to be. What liberalism does is that they take our identity, they use our identity, and then the point is to maintain the status quo. Just look at Margaret Thatcher. Just look at Kamala Harris. Just look at Hillary Clinton. They're all women. But look at how much fear and death that they spread. They have been spreading all over the world. Liberalism is never an answer because they're even more insidious than capitalism. They use our identity to serve the profit and the benefit for the ruling class. Only communism, only the revolution can help women to have our voice and bring us a chance to stand up and fight for our own rights, because we are sick of waiting for other people, for men to fight for us. We are sick of it. It is our time to stand up and fight for ourselves. And we are very powerful. We are very intelligent. We are very clever. We can do it. We have all the power that we have. What we do is to stand up, holding hands together, join in one movement, and then we, just like Vietnam, we are having a brighter future right now. And yes, Vietnamese women learned that lesson. We learned that feudalism doesn't help. We learned that colonialism absolutely didn't help. Fascism, the worst. And then imperialism, even countless atrocities on us. So yes, revolution and communism. Be a feminist, you must be a communist. You must join the Communist Party. Yeah, that is my message.
Thank you very much, Luna Oy.